Hello, welcome back. Today I want to show some of the metalworking stuff I did for my dad's pad. So let's start with some of the parts that I got back from the machine shop. They were pretty good, but some of them were not quite perfect, these sensor brackets in particular. Some of them were bent a little bit too far. I went through all of them and compared to a reference one that was at a perfect right angle. And there were like just under half of them that I needed to adjust a little bit because they were bent too far. I have a reference one there that I'm comparing against the ones that I'm hammering there. So yeah, just kind of put them on a piece of scrap wood, give them a few good smacks with the hammer, and they straighten right out. Working on that table is a little bit silly because I have a huge amount of stuff stacked on it, just all the parts for the entire project, so they all kind of rattle around when I'm hammering stuff there, but it's my best hammering surface, so it's what I use. I suppose really I should just move the big stacks of stuff that are there, but I haven't done that yet. So compare to the reference and it's all straightened out. Basically just stand them up next to each other to see if they stand properly. The wood gets some indentations on it over time from that, so I just used different parts of it, and like I said, this is just a piece of scrap wood, so it doesn't really matter what happens to it. And yeah, just adjust. I'm doing just the last few of those that I had in my stack of ones to adjust. You can see the two on the closer stack there are still yet to be fixed. If I hit it just right, they can bend pretty quickly. That hammer noise sounds so much louder when my video camera records it than in person for some reason. Let's see, I can't see my head. I don't remember if I was wearing hearing protection for this. Whether I was or not, it probably would have been a good idea. And there we go. All bent the way they need to be. So there's another thing with these sensor brackets that needs to be done. This thing that I'm holding here is a spacer. It's a little aluminum thing that's just about the same diameter as those holes. The idea is that it lets the screws be tightened down fully, but still lets the bracket move in place. Now, the way those are cut, some of them were not cut perfectly clean, and the spacer would actually get stuck. So I checked every bracket with the spacer and just slid it up and down like that, and the ones that got stuck I just worked on with a file for a little bit. Didn't take too much effort. Just run it up and down both sides, then retest, and it slides much more cleanly. So that way those things won't get stuck up or down or in any bad place. So the handle joint bracket, the thing the bar attaches to, I did make a discovery. Yeah, so see how I have to stretch that out just a little bit to make it fit on? So the specifications I gave to the machine shop were not specific enough about the exact distance between the posts, and it turned out that what they ended up doing was slightly farther apart than I expected. So the bar still does fit on it, but I had to make some other changes to accommodate. The holes, however, for the screws didn't line up perfectly, so I'm just working on that with a round file tool, just to trim down the metal a little bit so that it'll line up with the holes. This takes a fair bit of effort because I'm filing down metal. That takes effort. That's what I'm trying to say. So that one's done. Got one more. I just marked them out with a Sharpie. All the places where, when I fit those onto the bracket, where they overlapped with the screw holes. So file down all the parts I'd hit with a marker, and try another test fit. I've chosen a player 1 bar and bracket and a player 2 bar and bracket, just because they seem to match well. So that's what the label on that one is about. This didn't want to go down on there for some reason. And once it went down, it didn't really want to stay down. It's a little hard to see, but the screw holes over there are not quite lined up the way they need to be. Yeah, so that was not staying down. But yeah, after filing, I put in a screw, and it works just fine. So I realized, after I had spec'd these out and had the machine shop make them for me and everything, that it would have been a lot smarter just to have a simple hole through there. I asked them to tap it the whole way through, so that I could put a screw in like that. But it would have worked just as well to just stick a bolt through a slightly larger hole and use a nut on the other side of it. And I'm using a nut on the other side anyway, just to hold it in place better, so that was definitely a waste of machine shop time to have those fully tapped all the way through. So switching over to something a little different here. I needed to cut semicircular holes at the edge of some of my pieces of wood, and you'll see me do it with some of the metal a little bit later. So my solution for that was to clamp two together that needed the semicircle hole on opposite sides. Mark out a little thing for my hole saw drill bit, and just clamp them down real good and see what happens. So I have those 2x3s. There are my legs. They're very nice legs. I have those 2x3s on either side so that I can kind of hold them in place with my feet, and just try to keep stuff from moving around too much. Now I'm messing around here to see about aligning the hole saw with exactly where it needs to go, but I'm having a lot of trouble just eyeballing it. So eventually I figure out that that's just not going to work super well. So I try something else. So I get up to get another tool. These things are for sinking nails in, but they work just fine for punching a little hole in a place where you want to drill. So it just makes a small indentation in the wood or whatever you're drilling, if you tap it with a hammer a time or two. And just lets the drill bit be fed in by feel. So that hole saw has like a normal small drill bit in the middle of it before it gets to the big circular part. So that way I can just get it into the little indentation and be fine. So what do you suppose is going to happen here? I start the drill and... yeah, predictably my clamps aren't strong enough. Because those are just... yeah, not with those clamps, like I said. So instead, I go and get some different clamps that can be tightened down a whole lot better. And try it again. There are my legs again. I already have a little bit of a hole there, but... actually, I think I might have flipped those over and made a mark on the other side because it made a little bit of a mess when they split apart. So drill bit went in fine. How about the circular part? This plywood is thick enough that this takes a fair bit of time and effort to get through. I also keep wondering, maybe I shouldn't talk during this, it's very noisy. I also keep wondering how straight I'm actually holding the drill. Having access to a drill press for this particular thing would have made a lot of a difference. I know some people with them, but I guess I just didn't bother at the time. So with this one, I'm able to feel just fine when I get through it. So nice little circular wooden plug is taken out. Whole bunch of sawdust on the top. Lots and lots of sawdust. But a nice semicircle hole cut in the side of both of those. Just where it needs to be. So another one of these, slightly different shape, same sort of process. This one has a little bit less space on the sides where I have the 2x3s holding it in place. I think that causes me a few problems. So pay attention right here to the color of the sawdust. Looks like the same color, looks like the same color. It's getting a little bit lighter. So for whatever reason, when I was drilling through this one, I could not tell when I'd gotten all the way through it, and I kept going way too far into the other piece of wood I had under it, and didn't even realize what I had done. I was wondering why this was taking so long. But eventually I decided to stop drilling and take a look at what I've done. That thing does not want to come out. Couldn't get enough grip with that much surface area. Then I realize. Oops. But it worked just fine. Just wasted a little bit of effort. So this piece needs to be drilled the same way, but they're longer, so I couldn't get my legs in the same place, so I decided to just have it against a wall to anchor that part of it. The way I'm sitting is not as uncomfortable as it probably looks if I get everything in the right place. Also, the light in the room is behind me, so it's hard for me to see here and hard to see what's going on in video. Also hard to get a good drill angle, because I couldn't have my body as close to it as with the others. But that one actually worked just fine. So switching over to some metalworking with this stuff now. So I had this big 2 foot by 4 foot sheet of 26 gauge zinc plated steel. That's what I'm using for most of the metal in the pad, other than the stuff I had the machine shop make for me. Unfortunately, I had bought some 22 gauge non-plated steel, which was for welding, and it was already just a little bit rusted when I got it, and I realized it was going to rust more, so I couldn't use that stuff, and couldn't return it because I had already cut into it. But I realized this stuff would just work better, and it's slightly thinner, so it's easier to work with. So what I'm marking out here is a 12-inch line for the 2 stationary panel wrappers that I'm going to cut out of this sheet. The rest of the sheet turns into all the other metal parts that I need. Then a second sheet turns into the other 8 stationary panel wrappers. I'm using a piece of plywood as a straight edge here, but I realize that I'm on like basically the worst possible table for this. This is like a card table with some sort of, I don't know, well, really thin, not very strong structure to it. It sags in the middle, and it has a vinyl covering on it, which gets gouged a fair bit by the metal that I'm working with here. Unfortunately, it was like the only table I had with enough space to be able to do this stuff on it. So it did the job. It just was certainly was not a very good choice if I had a better choice available. So these things take a fair bit of effort to use. They work really well and let me cut as straight as I need to for this, with some effort. But yeah, they definitely do take a fair bit of effort to use the way I'm using them here. The way they're shaped, they kind of move the piece of metal to the left of them up and the piece of metal to the right of them down. So they both get bent just a little bit, so I have to correct for that after I've made the cuts with them. I'm leaving this cut in at normal speed, but it kind of takes forever, so all the others in this video will be sped up a fair bit. kind of just like using a big pair of scissors on some really, really thick paper. Paper that makes very satisfying noises when you get to the end of it. Clonk. So the end of that got bent a little bit, but this stuff is thin enough that it's super easy just to bend it back by hand, and not really a problem. So then I mark another 12-inch line, because that's 12 by 24 right now, and just cut that out. I had a little bit of trouble figuring out the right angle to hold this and look at it from, because pencil marks on sheet metal are a little hard to see, especially if there's any kind of reflection going on. I had a window over in front of me and an overhead light above me, so there was plenty of reflection, so it was hard to find just the right angles where I could see what was going on with the pencil mark. I had a little metal protrusion there that I just wanted to clip off so that it wouldn't manage to cut me later. Those shears are not the appropriate tool for the job, so I have a smaller pair that works reasonably okay. But still, for stuff like that, it's hard to exactly get just that one little bit off. So I do the best I can with that, but there's still a little bit of an edge to it. So instead, I go get another tool. I believe this is called a rasp. And I just sort of run it up and down the piece for a little while until it no longer has a sharp edge to it. If I had cut a little bit more carefully, this probably wouldn't have happened. I learned better techniques for using shears after that. So here I need to cut a very thin strip. I'll show you what sort of place it goes after it's cut. The thing about this is as it gets cut, it gets bent quite significantly, so it kind of just curls all around itself. And I need it straight, so that's moderately inconvenient. The pad has 4 pieces like this in it total. So there's my strip of metal that is turned into a helix. So I just sort of try and straighten it out by hand, which mostly works. The problem is it gets stretched just a little bit as that happens, so I couldn't ever get it completely straight. It kind of has a little bit of a curve to it still, like along the, like if it's laid flat, it doesn't go totally straight. I guess I'll just have to work with it a little bit more. It's going on the side of plywood on the outside edges of the pad, like that. So I actually just measured it with a piece of plywood to know how thick to cut. I decided to use the rasp to clean up all of the edges of it, just because I don't want to keep a whole bunch of metal around with sharp edges where I might cut myself. I just figure it's going to be nicer to be around if it doesn't have those. This took a lot of time. Also, I of course paid particular attention to the corners. They're the sharpest bits. That rasp is probably not the best possible tool for that job, but it does it, sort of. It kind of roughs up the metal just a little bit more than I'd like, but it roughs it up in a way that it's not going to be sharp enough to cut. So kind of similar strip here. It's a lot wider though. This one goes on the front, so it's the plate that's sort of just above the up arrow. Doesn't curl over nearly as much as the thinner ones. There were 3 more of those that I cut that I didn't bother recording. But yeah, it still definitely has that same curling problem. At this point, my right hand's getting pretty tired because this is a lot of work to cut. Straighten it out by hand, just like the other one. That one straightens a lot better because since it's wider, there's not nearly as much stretching that can make it sort of curve the on the other axis. So this one turns out pretty nice. The shears do leave kind of visible marks where each cut starts on the side that I cut. You can kind of see them there. There's not much I can really do about those. They're just going to be there. And then I didn't quite need the full width of that, so just a little bit to cut off there that I guess I must have already marked it. When you have little squares like that, this stuff feels just so stiff and thick. But the larger pieces are just so much more malleable. More filing once again. I did this to every single piece and it took forever, but I got it done. I'd run my finger along the edge just to see if there were any rough spots that needed attention. Once I was able to run all the way along and not feel anything unpleasant, and then I knew I was done. So some of these metal pieces need circular holes just like the wood earlier. So I try this, not entirely sure what's going to happen. That happens. Fortunately, that edge there wasn't sharp enough to cut my knee. I did get a cut on one of my legs that I just totally didn't notice while I was doing this until well after it. I don't know how it happened. It didn't happen right there. I don't have it in this shot, but I do have it later. That was a mystery. So cutting into metal with this hole saw feels super dicey and kind of unpleasant. Like the wood is unpleasant already, but the metal just takes it to another level. The drill wobbles all around and doesn't feel like it wants to do what you're trying to do, and then that happens a lot. Once again, drill press really would have helped with this. But I managed with just the handheld one, eventually. Got the thing out, and there's a nice circular hole. And metal shavings all over my floor. Those are a pain to clean up. I'm trying to get the thing out now, but I didn't have the appropriate tool on me, and it didn't want to come out, so I just kind of leave it there for the moment. The metal has a nice clean circular hole in it. So in contrast to the wood, I'm actually cutting that before I make the cut through the middle of it, since making the cut through the middle does not involve like a saw blade that takes off a whole bunch of extra material. I basically get all of it on both sides. So I can have a perfect semicircle that meets exactly... Oh, right. Let me demonstrate why work gloves are useful for this. Yeah. Thumb caught the sharp edge there, and it did what it was going to do. I had the gloves with me. I don't know why I wasn't wearing them there. I guess I just had to see what happened when I didn't until I learned my lesson and actually wear them. So those pieces aren't done yet. They still get another hole each because they have a semicircle on each side. I left enough space on either side so that I could drill in both of them and just discard the little bits on the outside of that. Unfortunately, these pieces are going to have to be redone. As I mentioned before, my handle joint bracket is not the shape that I thought it was. But at least I know what I'm doing now. That happens a lot. It's really hard to judge the appropriate... Oh, right, that was the other metal disc coming out that I forgot to remove from the hole saw before. That was not this one that I'm trying to cut now. It's really hard to judge the appropriate speed to use with the drill. If I go too fast, I just feel like the jerks are still going to happen. Like that, but they'll just be that much more violent. But if I go too slow, they're more likely to happen. So it's hard to know what to do. What I'm doing right here is I'm running the drill backwards to try to smooth out the partial hole that's made, because it's like cut through one side, but then the teeth of the hole saw just catch on the edge of the metal there. Eventually it just sort of works. So that's one of those pieces. Have the other one with me. I clamp it down the same position and do the exact same thing to it. Those two clamps do the job just fine on the other side, but I need a nice strong one here to make sure everything stays in place. I'm using my knee this time for a little bit better grip. It works, but I mean, it can't stop that from happening. You can kind of hear it catching on the edge of the metal there. That's... Seems like it just doesn't want to do its job, but eventually it manages. Like, that thing is supposed to be designed for cutting metal and wood and everything, so I don't know if I'm necessarily doing something wrong or if this is just what that experience is like. So those little bits on the outside just get discarded, and I end up with those nice pieces. Which, again, I'm going to have to redo because they're not quite the right shape. Holes, of course, needed some rasping, just so they'd be nice. That was scrap that I just trimmed off there, and then the last few pieces that are coming out of this sheet of metal. Also get holes in them, of course. These are the other halves of the back cover for the pad. There's one. These get a diagonal cut like that. And those two would be the ones that would go on the outside edges, like the right side of the player 2 pad and the left side of the player 1 pad, where there's a corner like that. It probably would have been a lot less effort if I hadn't bothered to put that corner there, but I wanted it for authenticity. Those are the ones that go on the inside, so right side of player 1 pad, left side of player 2 pad. And there we go. Nice pieces of metal. So I've done a bunch of more stuff. I've also wrapped a stationary panel in metal. I did a test assembly and got some footage of that. So that's the stuff I'm going to show next time. I'll see you then.